It's the 2022 World Cup. It's the squad update for Belgium. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin, and today we will be updating Belgium's squad for the 2022 World Cup. The final squads have been out for a little while, so here is the promised update media cast where we look at the selections, the non-selections, the surprises, the injury updates, and the predictions that we made in our full team podcast, where we went through all the candidates, gave career and participation information, and predicted each player's likelihood of making the squad. So today we'll check how accurate our predictions were, and we'll update recent games and other things. So check the show notes for links to that full player media cast, as well as the group media cast where we took a close look at the teams, their history and their chances in this tournament. If you want the short version, jump to the end where we give a summary of selections and injuries, and we reassess our predictions of the starters. All right, let's get started. Today I am wearing a Canada shirt. It is similar to a Belgium shirt in terms of the color, and I usually go for a color match on the podcast, but truth be told, that's not really the reason I'm wearing this shirt. I'm wearing this shirt because Canada meets Belgium in this group, and I'm Canadian, and this is a kind of a menacing threat that I'm wearing throughout the podcast to put fear into the souls of Belgium. Okay, well, no, really, it's just because I don't have a lot of shirts to choose from. Okay, let's move on to the formations for recent games. Well, we are focused on recent games. Belgium played 2 games in September. Those were Nations League games, and they also played a friendly against Egypt. And so the data for our previous the full player media cast went from the end of the Euro Cup to up till June 2022. So we had promised this update podcast to cover those games and also to review our predictions and injuries and stuff like that. So, but we will kind of look at the formations from the Euro Cup until now, which is includes the November 16th, I think it was, friendly against Egypt. And well, we'll just talk about those games first. So the September Nations League games was actually Game 5, the first 4 games of the Nations League played in June. So Game 5 was at home against Wales, and that was a 2-1 win. And Game 6 was away against Netherlands. That was a 0-1 loss. So in the Nations League, they finished second in their group. They finished behind the Netherlands, but ahead of Poland and Wales. So they remain in Nations League A next time around. The friendly was against Egypt, and that was played in Kuwait. So I imagine they chose the location to kind of acclimatize themselves to Qatar, and that was a 1-2 loss to Egypt. So they lost to Netherlands and Egypt. Kind of a bad note to go into the cup on, but yeah, there we have it. In terms of their formations, then, it's pretty consistent. It's a 3-4-2-1 almost all the time. Anyway, Matt Sells making the preliminary squad, but not the final squad, so we eliminate him from the list. And Thibaut Courtois, Simon Mignolet, and Cohen Casteels all selected. So that is the goalkeeping team for the squad. And just a note on Thibaut Courtois. So we did mention his injury for the June games. It's a kind of a groin problem. But he was playing for his club from mid-August. However, he was also injured in early October with a sciatic problem. A sciatic problem is something to do with the nerves in the back. But he recovered from that one too in mid-October. So Thibaut Courtois fit to play. Yes, so that's the goalkeeping. So he actually, because of those injuries and also because he was simply not selected, only started 3 of their 13 games to June 2022. However, he did start all 3 recent games, the 2 September and the 1 November, suggesting he is back. And that pretty much suggests he'll be the starter, but we're not talking about that here. We're going to do that at the end of the podcast. We'll run through the players one more time and predict which one we think is going to be the starter. Okay, let's move on to defenders. And for central defenders, now keep in mind that there are probably 3 because they always play with 3 at the back. So we have definite candidate Leander Den Donker, likely candidates Toby Alderweireld, Diedrich Boyata, and Jan Vertonghen, as well as Arthur Theate, and possible candidates Jason Denayer, Sieb van der Heyden, Wout Faes, and Sebastian Bornau. And a player seems to be off the squad, Thomas Vermaelen. So among all of those players, well, we'll go from the top this time. Leander Den Donker made it to the squad. So did Toby Alderweireld. However, Diedrich Boyata only made it to the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. Jan Vertonghen and Arthur Theate did make the final squad. And among the possible candidates, Wout Faes made the squad, but Jason Denayer, Sieb van der Heyden, and Sebastian Bornau all made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. And Thomas Vermaelen is kind of off the squad now, so we didn't expect him to be there, and indeed he isn't. So that leaves us with 5 candidates, Den Donker, Alderweireld, Vertonghen, Theate, and Faes. So let's talk about the position, and we're kind of going to divide it into the 3 parts here. So if you think about the 3-man central defense, there's a central defender and a right and a left. So we'll begin with the central. And actually that was mostly Boyata and Denayer playing that position. But neither of those were chosen. It was Alderweireld sometimes towards the end of June there. On the left side, it was mostly Vertonghen and Theate. Theate coming in towards the end, and Denayer a couple of times early on. And on the right side, it was mostly Alderweireld, but Denayer showed up here too. So did right defender Castagne for a couple of games, and Den Donker at the end. So a bit more rotation there on the right side. I want to tell you something interesting about Denayer because you know, he showed up in all 3 positions there, so you would think that he was a strong candidate. In fact, we only had him as a possible candidate, and the reason was that the manager had said he was unattached going into the new season, and the manager said that he would not be selected if he remained without a club. So the club he joined was Shabab Al Ahly in the Middle East there. He did that shortly after the selection, but we had speculated that maybe that wasn't kind of the level of club that would be satisfactory to the manager. And given that he wasn't selected, I wonder if we were right about that. Anyway, he made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. Okay, let's look at the September games, and it was Alderweireld in the middle for all 3, and Vertonghen on the left for 2, and then Theate on the left in the November game. But on the right side, it was a newcomer, De Bast, for all 3 games. So I didn't mention the newcomer, I actually forgot, but I will do that now. So there was a new player added, and that is Zeno De Bast. And he hadn't made it on our radar during the full length podcast because he was new to the squad, starting both of their September games there. Um, so that gives him 2 caps since 2022. He's just 19 years old and plays for Anderlecht in Belgium. So that new player added Zeno de Bast, and starting on the right side. In fact, it's 3 caps now because he started all 3 of those games. So that's kind of interesting. Let's move on though to the left back position, and actually there are no candidates here in the left back position, and in fact they don't use the position because with the three-man back line, it's a winger, a 3-4-2-1. So the right and left side of the pitch is a winger rather than a back. However, the same is true for right backs, but we do have candidates at the right back position, and we have definite candidate Timothy Castagna and possible candidate Thomas Fouquet. So Timothy Castagna did make the squad, and Thomas Fouquet did not. But we're not sure whether that was due to injury or whether that was due to non-selection. So he was out with a hamstring injury for the September games. That was an injury he had picked up in early August. And he did actually return for his last club game in November. So technically was healthy, probably not fit, but at least healthy to be selected. However, he wasn't selected. So, fitness might have been an issue there, but he was only a possible candidate. And and so it might have been that even if he was healthy, he wouldn't have been selected. We're not sure. He did make the preliminary squad, though, so he was at least considered. Okay, Timothy Castagna. So Timothy Castagna is a right back, but he played mostly as a right winger in the formation they use, and actually twice as a central defender during the 2021-22 period. He did show up in the recent games too. I think he played 2 games, one on the right side and one on the left side. All right, so right backs, Timothy Castagna going to the World Cup. Let's take a look at midfielders, and we will start with defensive midfielders. We only have one candidate there, actually, and that is the Amadou Onana, and we had categorized him as possible but unlikely. However, he did make the squad, and that took us by surprise. So let's move on to central midfielders, where we have many more candidates. Definite candidates Yuri Tielemans and Axel Witsel. Possible candidate Dennis Praet, and possible but unlikely Aurel Mangala and Albert Sambi Lokonga. And okay, let's go to the top. And Yuri Tielemans did make the squad, as did Axel Witsel. So the candidates we had considered definite were selected. The possible candidate Dennis Praet was selected for the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. And the other 2, who we consider possible but unlikely, also made it to the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. That's Aurel Mangala and Albert Sambi Lokonga. Okay, and let's review the position. If you think about the formation, the 4-2-3-1, then we're looking at 2 central midfielders or a pairing, defensive or central midfielders, a pairing. And that pairing is usually Tielemans and Witsel up until the 2022 June Nations League games. But in the main podcast, we noted some of the details, some of the other players who appear there. We're not going to go through all of those details again, but just kind of summarize the main players who played the position. So in the recent games, Tielemans and Witsel paired for the first September Nations League game, but Onana and then Onana replaced Tielemans for the second September game, and attacking midfielder Vanaken replaced him for the November game. Vanaken does come into this position from time to time. So, however, Witsel played all 3 games there. So we'll talk a bit later whether that influences our decision on the predictions, whether that changes the previous predictions we made there. Okay, over to left midfielders, and we have candidates, possible candidate Adnan Januzaj, and seems to be off the squad Nasser Chadli. And both of these players made it to the preliminary squad, but didn't make it to the final squad. So Adnan Januzaj and Nasser Chadli will not be going to this cup. And if you think about the formation again, the 3-4-2-1, there really are no kind of left and right midfielders there. They would tend to be left and right wingers. So perhaps part of the reason these players were not chosen was that their position wasn't really in use. However, on the other side of the field, we do have a candidate as a right midfielder, and it's Thomas Meunier, and he was selected for the final squad. But of course, that means he'll be playing out of position when he plays, and indeed that's true. He generally plays as a right winger, but he doesn't play that many games for them, so we had him just as a likely candidate going into this. Okay, over to left wingers, and then this tends to be the no, there are left wingers in the 3-4-1-2. So let's look at who the candidates are. We have a definite candidate, Leandro Trossard, and a likely candidate, Yannick Carrasco, and Thorgan Hazard, also likely, and a possible candidate in Dries Mertens. So let's see who made it. And Leandro Trossard is selected. Yannick Carrasco also selected. Thorgan Hazard also. And Dries Mertens also. Sorry, I would have said all 4 if I was paying attention. But yes, all 4 of them made the squad. So let's talk about the position of left winger. Actually, none of these seem to have laid claim to the spot. All of them have kind of stepped into the spot from time to time, but none of them enough that we kind of favor them as a starter. In the recent games, though, it was Carrasco twice playing the spot, and then right defender Timothy Castagna, who had once played there before, coming in for the other game. So as if they don't have enough candidates on this side, they're drafting in the right defender to come over and play the position. Okay, and also we should note that Eden Hazard is also coded as a left winger, but we have moved him upfield to the left attacking midfielder role. Okay, let's move on to the right side of the field, the right wingers. And here we have likely candidate Alex Saelemaekers and possible but unlikely candidate Dodi Lukebakio, and a player who seems to be off the squad, Jeremy Doku. And we were actually a bit baffled by that because he had played well, or we thought he had played well in the Euro Cup, but that was his last appearance for the team. However, surprisingly, he was called back into the team, Jeremy Doku, and he was the only one among these candidates to make it. So Sailormakers and Luca Bacchio made it to the preliminary squad, but it was actually Jeremy Doku who made the final cut there. So a bit of a surprise selection there. And let's look at the position. So on the right wing position, it's really a mix of mostly out of position players playing the right wing. Most often Mounier and Castagna. So Castagna kind of switches sides also. These two shared the duties in the recent games also. So Munio played the September Nations League games and Castagna played the November friendly. But Jeremy Doku's return to the squad could make it interesting. I wonder if he'll kind of challenge for the position. He wasn't a starter in the Euro Cup, by the way. He just started a B team game, game 3. Jeremy Doku. Okay, and during the full-length podcast, we also kind of created this category of versatile midfielders, and these are for kind of players who play in several positions on the field, usually in the midfield, but they kind of play all over the field. So both of them are definite candidates. It's Kevin De Bruyne and Hans Vanaken. And both of them were selected for the final squad. I guess we don't need to talk about their positions too much, just because their names will come up when we talk about other positions. Okay, we move on to the forward line, and we include attacking midfielders among the forwards there. So let's take a look at the candidates. Here we have likely candidate Eden Hazard. We actually moved him to this position, but he's coded primarily as a left winger. We also have Charles de Ketelaere as a likely candidate, and we have Yari Verscheren as a possible but unlikely candidate. And among those players, Eden Hazard was selected for the squad. But Charles de Ketelaere was also selected. He was a likely candidate. But Yari Verscheren was not selected. He was selected for the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. And I think that preliminary squad was huge. It was 55 players, pretty much the maximum they could make it. I think 60 was the maximum. Okay, so attacking midfielders, let's talk about the position. And if you think of the 3-4-2-1 or the 3-2-2-2-1, we don't really have an attacking midfielder. We kind of have a left attacking midfielder and a right attacking midfielder, which we will talk about soon. No, we'll talk about it now. So on the left side, the left attacking midfielder, the position is generally Eden Hazard's. And we dealt with some of the players who have also stepped into the position. We did that during the full player version, but we won't repeat all that here. But suffice to say that the main player beyond Eden Hazard is that roving midfielder, Vanaken. For the recent games that left attacking midfielder, it was actually Eden Hazard starting all 3 of those games. So that's a bit of a return to action for Hazard, because he had only played 7 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. So only starting half the time, but now seems to be returning to a permanent position. On the right side, generally, it was right winger Mertens or Kevin De Bruyne, though that is simplifying things quite a bit. There were players kind of coming in and out of the position, and but in the recent games that seemed to be nailed down, because it was Kevin De Bruyne for all 3 games. All right, well, that brings us to the end of attacking midfielders, and we only have the forwards to go. And let's look at the candidates. So definite candidate, Michy Batshuayi. Batshuayi, and likely candidate Romelu Lukaku. And we have two possible candidates, Christian Benteke and Lois Openda. And then two possible but unlikely candidates, Divock Origi and Dante Van Zeer. And among those candidates, Michy Batshuayi was selected. Romelu Lukaku was selected, but there is a note on him. And then Lois Openda, the possible candidate, was selected, but not Christian Benteke. He made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad, as did Divock Origi, but didn't make the final cut. And Dante Van Zeer didn't even make the preliminary squad, so we'll remove him from the list here. Okay, let's go back to that the note on Romelu Lukaku. So he was out with an ankle injury for the last 3 games in June there, but he recovered from that and he was playing for his club in August. But from the end of August, he was out with a hamstring injury. We had reported that in the previous podcast as a muscle problem, but it turned out to be a hamstring problem. But he did recover from that in late October. That was actually the return date. He was expected to come back in late October, and he did. And he played a couple of games. He actually just subbed into 2 games for his club. And then he was out again with a biceps femoral muscle injury. That's actually the muscle at the back of the thigh, so it's similar to a hamstring injury. And on the injury report that I have, it says he's expected to return in late November. However, reading articles on it, they do say he's out for the first game against Canada, but they have hopes that he will play in the group stage. So despite that injury, they brought him to the Cup and are hoping he'll recover in time to have an influence in the Cup. So Romelu Lukaku coming to the Cup injured and won't be available for at least the first game. I suspect it'll be a little bit more than that based on other information I've read. Okay, that is the end of the player-by-player review. So let's move on to the next section, which is statistics. So we did some of these stats for the team in the full-length podcast, but that was for all the definite, likely, and possible players. So here we're doing it for just the 26 players. And the average age of our squad here is 27.4, and that is fairly old actually as a team on the whole. But there are other teams of the same age. 27 is the average, so it's not extreme. But we do have 5 players who are 33 or older, and we have balancing that out at the other end. 6 players who are 22 or younger. So let me just show you who they are. The 5 players who are 33 or older are Vertonghen, Mertens, Mignolet, Alderweireld, and Witsel. After that, we have 6 players who are in their 30s besides, so that makes it 11 players in their 30s. On the whole. At the other end, we have 6 players. So I'm just looking for starters amongst them, but none of them are really starters there. So kind of working their way into the squad. Okay, let's look at the average number of caps. And the average for Belgium is 52.5. So sorry, that's 52.2. And here we have another chart with Jan Vertonghen at the top of that chart too, which makes sense because he's the oldest. Jan Vertonghen with 142, and altogether there are 6 players with more than 100 caps. And then we have 2 with almost 100 caps, and then it drops down to 60 caps. So a really well experienced team. At the bottom end, we have 6 players who have less than 10 caps. That would probably be the most of the players we have who are the youngest as well. So that compares 52 caps with an average among the teams of 34 caps. So while Belgium is slightly older than other teams, they are far more experienced on the field than any other team. Hang on. Qatar, who plays, a million games, as many games as they can, is the only team more experienced. The next closest one is Mexico at 49. So this is really high. Almost 20 points above the average. Total goals for the squad is 247, which is also really high. The average is 122, so this is more than double the goals any team has. However, we divide that into the number of caps they have, and it's not as extreme as it seems. But their total goals per cap is 18.2, and the average is 13.6. So it is very high. It is, in fact, the highest. So this would make them the top scoring team. Oh, no, wait, I do see France is at 20.1%. And Argentina's at 18.5, but they're up there with the highest scoring teams in the world, actually, Belgium. So that's their strength. We'll talk about maybe a weakness when we get to the discussion at the end, but let's move on to some summaries. So the next section deals with a few summaries, and they're self-explanatory as we go through. So the first one is notable non-selection. So these would be definite or likely candidates that were not selected. So the first is Matt Sells. We had him as a likely candidate, but we did know that they, and that was kind of based on his participation. So he had been involved, but we knew one of those goalkeepers would get cut, and we actually predicted that it would be Matt Sells. So not really a surprise there. A bit more surprising is Dedrick, but Boyata, the central defender. We also had him as a likely candidate, but he was not selected. And we'll actually add Jason Denayer here. We told that story above about him being told to find a club. Well, for whatever reason, perhaps he didn't satisfy the coach or the manager. He was not selected. And finally, we had, so actually because of that, we only had Denayer as a possible candidate, but he had played quite a bit. So it is a surprise in that sense. And finally, we have Alexis Sailormakers. We also had him as a likely candidate, not so much because he started, but because he was called up quite regularly, but he was not selected. He made it to the preliminary squad, as did all of these players, but not to the final squad. Now, the next summary is surprise inclusions. So these would be possible but unlikely or seemingly off the squad players who were selected. So the first one is Amadou Onana, the defensive midfielder, and also Jeremy Doku. And I feel good about this one because we kind of felt he had done well in the Euro Cup and were wondering why he hadn't been selected after. I'm personally happy to see him back because he made a good impression on me there. The next one is new players. We only have one, but it's an interesting one. It's Zeno DeBas in central defense. So selected above a throng of players there, selected above them. And not only that, but starting all 3 games in September and November there. So I'm kind of excited to see him. I'm guessing he's going to be a starter. And finally, the updates on injuries, we've divided into 4 sections. So we have players who have recovered from injury, and that would be Thibaut Courtois. So we talked about him in the previous podcast. We thought he'd come back, and he did. The next is injury doubts. So these are players with injury that were nevertheless selected for the squad, and that is Romelu Lukaku, the only player in this category, but it's a big one. And yes, not expected to play the first game. Possibly won't play in the group stage, but they brought him in hopes that he will recover. Players who were dropped due to injury, well, Belgium has been quite lucky as far as that goes. They haven't had to drop anyone because of injury. And players who were injured but were not strong candidates, we put Thomas Fockett in this category. We weren't dead sure whether it looks like the hamstring injury kind of sealed the deal, but technically he's back in action, so technically he's a non-selection, but it might have been fitness, or it might have been just that he was a possible candidate anyway. So Thomas Fockett there. Okay, let's finish with a prediction of our starters then. So we predict that Roberto Martinez is going to be there on the sidelines. Let's go to goalkeepers. The candidates are Thibaut Courtois, Simon Mignolet, and Koen Casteels. And I might add that we're very happy as Canadians that Eustachio, our defensive midfielder, who plays with Porto, scored a goal against Simon Mignolet. That is a sign of things to come, we believe. Okay, I'll move on. That's another part of my ongoing threat to scare Belgians in this podcast. Okay, Thibaut Courtois, Simon Mignolet, and Koen Casteels. And we said in the last podcast that we thought Courtois would be the starter provided he was fit. He answered that by starting all three recent games, which suggests that he is fit and ready to go. So we think he's going to be the starter. Central defenders. The candidates are Leander Den Donker, Toby Alderweireld, Jan Vertonghen, Arthur Theate, Wout Faes, and newcomer Zeno de Bast. And we had Alderweireld and Vertonghen as starters, but we couldn't nail down the third player, the right side central defender. And it seems like the manager couldn't either, and brought in de Bast, because he played that position in those three September and November games. So that's a fairly clear signal to us that the manager intends to use him. So we're gonna say Alderweireld and de Bast are starters. De Bast really making its way in quickly and suddenly. We're a little hesitant to name Vertonghen though, because there is a little threat from Theate. However, our official prediction is going to go with Vertonghen, even though we think Theate might get a start. We're going to go with Alderweireld, Vertonghen, and de Bast as the starters there. Amongst left backs, we have no candidates, but among right backs, we had pegged Castagna as a starter, although there is no right back position, so we saw him starting as a winger. We thought he might also act as a backup defender, although they do have plenty of players there in the defensive end. Anyway, Timothy Castagna, we think he's going to be a starter. Defensive and central midfielders, we initially had Tielemans and Witsel as the starters in our previous podcast. And even though Tielemans was replaced in 2 of the 3 recent games, we still think he is the starter. So we nominate them both, although Axel Witsel is more guaranteed than Tielemans based on the evidence. Left midfielders, we have no candidates. Right midfielders, we think Meunier is a sometime starter, so won't start every game, but will start some. On the left wing, we have candidates Leandro Trossard, Yannick Carrasco, Thorgan Hazard, and Dries Mertens. And we predicted in the previous podcast a rotation of these three, and actually four with Castagna right back, Castagna in the mix. And really, there are arguments for all of them, but none of them is compelling enough for us to nominate a starter. Although Carrasco playing two of the three recent games maybe gives him the edge. But we're going to stick with the rotation here. We do put Yannick Carrasco kind of on top, and we do kind of put Thorgan Hazard on the bottom of that rotation. And we put Castagna as a starter above. Dries Mertens, on the other hand, was not even in the mix for us there. And we think if he gets onto the field, he might even play in a different position. Okay, right wingers. We only have Jeremy Doku, but he's too new or he returned too suddenly. So, there's an outside chance of him making a bid for the right winger position, but probably not. Yes, and for right wingers, we were reluctant to name Mounier as a possible starter because he hadn't played enough. That was in the previous podcast. However, he did start both September friendlies, and this persuades us to name him as a possible starter, as we did above. Okay, for the versatile midfielders, we have Kevin De Bruyne and Hans Vanaken. And in the previous podcast, we had nominated them both as starters, but we think we were too hasty in nominating Vanaken. De Bruyne started all three of the recent games in September and November as a right attacking midfielder, so we stick with him as a starter. But we're going to pull back on Vanaken here because he only started one of their three games, so we're going to demote him to a sometime starter. All right, and the attacking midfielders are next, the left and right attacking midfielders, since they don't use central attacking midfielders. And Hazard had only started about half of the games to June 2022, so we were a bit doubtful to name him as a starter, even though he's a big name. But he did start all three recent games, so in addition to him being a big name and the captain, he now is getting the starts that we would expect. De Bruyne, De Bruyne will go as far as to say that we think he's going to be the starter as the right attacking midfielder. So we think he's going to roam the field a bit less than he did in the period after the Euro Cup. Okay, and finally for forwards, well, we were doubtful in the previous podcast whether Lukaku would really be fit enough to start because he gets injured often, and we unfortunately proved right as far as that goes. So Batshuayi fills in. We don't really see Batshuayi as a starter normally, but we think he will be here as the main replacement for Romelu Lukaku. So we think Batshuayi, at least for the first few games, will be the starter, and Lukaku will come in if he's able. All right, well, we finished with some closing thoughts, and we're not going to review the whole discussion we had about Belgium in the team podcast about their chances. We're just going to answer this question: does the selection change our opinion about their chances? Well, I would say slightly. I think Romelu Lukaku is a big loss and that he won't actually be fit enough to play in the group stage. But I do think Belgium can largely overcome that problem, at least in the group stage. The thing that concerns me about Belgium, I've been thinking about it as we're doing these podcasts, is that they're quite weak on the wings. They don't have any kind of left backs or right backs. And it struck me that the teams they're playing against are actually all quite strong on the wings. And so I worry a little bit about their defense. We had pretty much guaranteed them to pass the group stage, but I'm kind of wondering if this problem may cost them a few points at the group stage or beyond the group stage. Yeah, more of a concern than really a change of opinion. It's quite possible that Belgium can go quite far, and that really hasn't been a problem for them because they tend to win, most of their games. So really not a change of opinion, but just something kind of we're looking out for. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of this podcast, and I hope I haven't bothered Belgium too much with my Canada comments. Keep an eye out for us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end, and our website on the graphic that I always forget to show here. At the bottom, soccerphiles.captivate.fm, and please check our show notes for links to our website and to kind of navigate our material. And we hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.